We are still in the book of purity. And learning a new section. Let's get right into it. It's called The Laws of Impurity of Foods, Tumas Eichlim, Chapter 1. Including this text is one positive commandment, the laws of impurity that affects liquids and foods and what makes them fit to contract it. Right. This mitzvah is explained in the ensuing chapters. In other words, we've learned about, we're going to learn actually about vessels becoming impure. That's the next topic. Implements. Here we're learning about actually food can become impure. Regular food or consecrated food, right? Food meant for human consumption. It can become impure. Impure just means you can't bring it to the holy temple to use it in a place of a holiday like we're in now that people would come. You would have to bring only food that's pure, right? So how does it become impure? Of course, it's a spiritual impurity. It's not a physical thing, right? But let's learn. Okay, halacha 1. All foods that are designated for human consumption, bread, meat, grapes, olives, and the like, are susceptible to ritual impurity, right? So bread, by the way, bread is something that was made. Grapes is something that is natural, right? So it doesn't matter the fact that it was natural or if it was made by a human being, right? And like bread, they're susceptible. Now, what does it mean? It means like if a dead rodent or a carcass of an animal or a person that's a corpse, a dead corpse, will make it food impure. That's what it means, right? In those examples. I mean, there's other circumstances also, but just to give you the basic idea. Okay, all foods.
Just the basic idea.
Yeah. All foods that are not designated for human consumption are pure and are not susceptible to ritual impurity unless one had a specific intent and set them aside for human consumption. Right? So something that is not usually eaten by humans, unless you specifically are going to eat this for, then that can make it ritually, make it susceptible, right? Food is not impure unless it becomes susceptible to impurities. We'll learn what that means. Okay. But it has to be human consumption, right? Dog food cannot become ritually impure. Because it's only humans that can be pure or impure in the sense, that we can choose a life of holiness or the opposite, right? So therefore, the things that are of human consumption could become susceptible to ritual impurity. So no foods are susceptible to ritual impurity unless they are first dampened with one of the 7 liquids. This dampening is referred to as a hechsher. Hechsher means preparation, right? How's it prepared? That it got damp. In other words, food that's growing, as we'll learn, food that's still the apple that's on the apple tree is not susceptible because it's its source of growth. When you pick the apple from the tree, and you will see with intent, make it damp with a liquid, water, other things we'll see, other liquids, then now it doesn't make it impure. It could now become impure. Otherwise, it can't become impure. That's the uniqueness of food. There needs to be a process of hechsher. Hechsher means preparation, right? Like a hechsher on food means it was properly prepared, right? It means it was properly prepared. So the food has to have the preparation. Unlike other things, like an implement, like a vessel, right? Like a spoon, doesn't need preparation. We'll learn about that later, not now. Okay? Just to have the distinction. A person doesn't need preparation in order to become impure. Right? A person walks into a room with a corpse, you become impure. The food won't become impure unless it first was water touched it, or one of the seven liquids touched it, made it damp, and now it could be susceptible to becoming impure, being in the room where there's a corpse, for example. Is that clear?
I'm asking myself about the corpse of an animal that we
That's called a carcass. We don't call it a corpse. Human, we call it corpse. Animal, we call it carcass. Okay?
the carcass of the animal because we eat meat like it's dead animal. So
Yeah, but that's slaughtered. That's not a carcass. That's called slaughtered meat. That's different. That's different than a carcass. Slaughtered meat is not called a carcass. It is a carcass of an animal, but we don't call it halachically carcass, right? Doesn't have the definition of a, it's called slaughtered meat as opposed to, okay? Yeah, that's why English is not necessarily going to be the right terminology, but we're speaking in English, so that's how we're, right? Okay. So these concepts derive from the verse, as it says, when water will be placed on a seed. So seed is actually, as well, we'll learn more about it, right? So the verse says water, meaning there's got to be a liquid, right? And then the verse continues saying how it contracts impurity after water was first placed on the seed, right? Is that clear? Well, these are the seven liquids that make food susceptible to impurity: water, dew, meaning from above, oil, wine, milk, blood, and honey. That's interesting. Blood, huh? We'll learn more about that later.
Does you imply rain as well too? Oh, or does anything here imply with water? Dew?
It says, yeah, it's interesting, dew, but not rain. That's a good question. How's it?
Wasn't it pure? You can eat stuff.
It's blood that flows from an animal when it's slaughtered. That's the blood that we're talking about. Okay? Not human blood. Okay. They do not make food susceptible to impurity unless they fall upon them as desired by the owner. So the owner of the food has to, you wash your apple. You desire to wash your apple. Now it's susceptible to impurity, right? But if accidentally water fell from a pitcher onto the apple, right, and you didn't want that, then it's not susceptible. There has to be the mindfulness, the willingness of the owner. And if I did it to your apple, no, right? Nor may they be squalid, for squalid liquids do not make food fit to contract impurity. Okay, disgusting water, liquid. In other words, let's say the water is full of contaminants or dirty, right? Then it's not. It has to be, once food has been made susceptible to ritual impurity, it retains its status after you dry it with no liquid on it. So you washed your apple, you dried it. Drying it didn't make it now not susceptible. It's still susceptible. It didn't make it impure. Susceptible means it can now become impure, right? Before the washing of that apple, right? Then if it was in a room with a corpse, it doesn't become impure. Okay, is that clear? When food has been dampened with fruit juice, example, berry juice or pomegranate juice, even though it is wet and it was touched by azab, azab is a person who has an emission, is impure, or the flesh of a corpse, it is pure. Why? Because it's not made susceptible to impurity by one of the seven liquids. Fruit juice is not one of the liquids, right? Only the seven liquids, number 4, that we mentioned are considered liquids that are susceptible to ritual impurity. Other fruit juices, by contrast, neither make food susceptible to impurity, nor do they contract ritual impurity themselves at all. So fruit juice won't. Why would that be? My take on it is why? I think maybe he will explain it. I don't remember now. Because fruit is not made to be made juice normally. It's made to eaten as a fruit. Its secondary function is juice, right? As opposed to oil, olives, its main function is oil. Its secondary function is to eat it as olives, right? So therefore, it's one of the liquids, right? Is that clear? That I think I've learned that before. Okay, number 5. When grapes and olives have not reached a third of their maturity, the liquids they produce do not make food susceptible to ritual impurity, nor are these liquids themselves susceptible to ritual impurity. Instead, they are like other fruit juices, and they are not pure, and they are pure forever. Why? Because you do not take an olive that's only less than a third matured and crush it to make oil with it, because you're going to get very little oil and a limited oil. So you don't do that. So in other words, it's not called an olive for oil. It's just an olive that's still growing, and and therefore that would not have that law. It's very fascinating. The following herbs are not susceptible to ritual impurity, even though people eat them. The rationale is that they are not eaten to receive benefit from them as independent entities, but because they impart flavor, aroma, and appearance to other foods. Wow, they include ginger, aldehyde, the primary spices, asafoetida, root, asafoetida, pepper, safflower. Similar laws apply in regard to all analogous substances. In other words, it's just fascinating, the parameter of the law over here. Now there's an herb that's not for itself, it's not food then. It's only what's the word, what we use in English? It's a enhancement of food, but it's not food. It's an enhancer of food, but it's not food, right? Therefore, it doesn't have the law that it can become impure, susceptible to impurity. Very fascinating. Dill can be assumed to be used to be eaten itself like other vegetables of the field. If it is intended to flavor a cooked dish, it does not contract the ritual impurity of foods. So dill can go either way, right? Depending on how you're using it. Once dill is imparted flavor to a cooked dish, it is considered as a waste product and does not contract the impurity of foods, right? What happens with dill, right? When you make pickles, right? You throw away the dill after it's done its job. You don't need the dill there anymore. In the pickles, you throw it away. It's waste. So therefore, since it's waste, it's not what? Food.
Oh,
It's not food. It's waste.
so
It's
it's meant to fry.
because all it was not, right?
Meant to be the primary thing to be eaten, primary food.
It's right.
And an enhancement to the pickles.
Right. Vetch is animal feed. It's beans, usually used for animal fodder, but can also be used for humans in difficult situations. Oh, you're right. Thank you. Number 8. Dates and dried figs that were placed in a cooked dish as spices still contract the impurity associated with foods until they become spoiled to the point that they are not fit for human consumption. Why? Because dates and dried figs generally are used for themselves to be eaten. They are also used, right? My wife made on Rosh Hashanah. She made chicken with that wasn't dates. It was
Was on prunes? Yeah.
huh?
Was it prunes?
Prunes, prunes, prunes and apricots. Prunes and apricots, right? But prunes and apricots are usually eaten themselves. They're also used, but that's secondary. So therefore, even when you use them, they can contract, right? If vetch was designated for human consumption, it contracts the impurity associated with foods. right? Why? How come? It's animal fodder. Yeah?
Because it's designed for human consumption.
No, it's not. It's animal fodder. But sometimes people, when they're very poor, right, you use because it's beans. It's a kind of a mixture you use for animals, but some people, when they're very poor, they will eat it themselves, right? So that is then pending on what your intention is. Herbs of a palm are considered as wood in every way. If they were cooked and fried, they contract the impurity associated with foods. Hearts of palm are considered as wood. That's funny. Wow. How's it not food? I guess back in the day, they were, because they need to be cooked. I guess as they are. So they're considered part of the palm. Grape seeds and grape pomace, even though they were collected to serve as foods, do not contract the impurity associated with foods. Since people do not usually partake in them, so the fact that someone did, right, your intent is not significant here. When it came to vetch, I guess it was more common that people would eat these beans when they were down and out. But grape seeds was not a common thing. So even though you ate it, didn't make it now something that's susceptible. Okay, we're going to stop over here. So what we're learning over here is just what is a parameter of something that's called food, right? It would become susceptible. All right, folks. Amazing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Good Shabbos, everybody.